everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. Dude, we're on part 2 of the Greatest Punchers series, which means I'm here with my dude Aris Pina, compy box operator, and just a fight historian kind of guy like myself. Aris, what's up, man?
What's going on, man? How's everything?
It's hot. The world is
Very
hot.
Very, very hot. That's word of the day, hot.
But yo, dude, people can be cruising to the beach, to the lake, to the river, wherever it is they're cruising or not cruising, and crank this podcast up, listen
Yes.
with the top down, whatever the case may be, dude. Got some fun stuff to talk about today.
I think our podcast would be suitable at the beach. Nice and relaxing. Absolutely.
Yeah, just every so often, gotta make sure the kids plug their ears. Every so often, I got a potty mouth. It's pretty bad, but
For sure. But yeah, man, the first one was so nice we had to do it twice. In the episode, there was a lot to talk about, man. When we talk about the biggest punches ever, there's a lot of ground to cover, and I hope whoever listened to the first show quite realized that there would be a part 2 because there's quite a few names we left out in the first episode. Just, we're just throwing names out there randomly. Whoever comes to mind, you just gotta say it. So, yeah, of course there was gonna be a part 2. You know what I mean? This is a fun ass subject to go over. Like we said before, we all love knockouts. We all just, love a guy that's a devastating puncher who can just deliver it, and the fighter themselves kind of, fall in love with their power as well, man. We talked about how when how a fighter describes when they hit somebody and they just feel a certain way their body torques and everything, how it goes into it, that they just know they're about to send somebody to take a nap for a little bit. Like, pretty interesting stuff. So here we are.
yeah, and as we were like closing it out last week and stuff like that, we're almost kind of like going down a short list of fighters that we forgot because there's so many. Like we could literally talk about, we could make like several different parts to this if we wanted to, and heck, we might even. But for now, just on part 2, there were fighters that were like prominent fighters that we didn't bring up, didn't mention very much, or didn't get to like really delve into. And there's tons of really great punchers out there, obviously. So speaking of which, though, dude, I mean, I know you got your list, I kind of got my list. There's probably going to be some overlap. Who's one?
All right, so here's a question. I know you had some boxing experience as well as I did. So when you got in the ring, who was the type of fighter you hated to fight the most? Was it like a squatty slugger, or was it be like a tall, lanky dude, or what?
Well, I was not very good with dealing with the jab. I mean, like it's like one of those things I was talking with you guys the other day where I'm like, if I had known that then, like, if I was as mature in my brain then, but had like the same 170-pound body, like, the meeting of these would be good. But no, like I couldn't do shit if somebody was just sitting there jabbing me back in the day. So I didn't want somebody just sitting there jabbing me.
Totally. Yeah, my worst type of opponent were the tall, lanky ones who just knew how to use distance well. Like, I wasn't particularly small guy either in turn when I was younger. Now I am, but they you stop growing at a certain time. But yeah, the worst type of opponents were the tall, lanky ones who not only were they really tall, lanky, had a really good jab and everything, but they had unusual power because of it. So I think
Those tall, freaky, spindly bastards.
Yeah, man. Looks like they're a bunch of fishing poles kind of hung together or whatever, but for whatever reason, they just exude tons of power. The guys I got in the ring with luckily didn't hit as hard as the guy I was about to bring up, but Tommy Hearns has to be the first one.
We briefly mentioned him last week because there's some overlap with a lot of stuff with a lot of these punchers, but
we didn't really get into it, like talk about it. We just kind of talked about, like, I think how I got into the sport basically was, watching Tommy Hearns really young with my dad. So
yeah, you were mentioning that last week, and I remember early in my fandom, he was still like just kind of barely clinging on active. Like, he was trying to kind of constantly come back or whatever, and already he was not at a stage where he should be coming back, obviously. But even so, I remember watching like ESPN Classic or eventually like trading fights or fight tapes or whatever. And always 2 of the fights that were on there, if it was like about knockouts, were the Duran fight and the Pepino Cuevas fight. And I just remember like watching those was like was early kind of like excitement for me. I remember watching those like knockouts and being like, oh, you know what I mean? Like just like, holy shit, those are some fucking knockouts. You know what I mean? Like memorable knockouts. And that was Tommy Hearns might not have taken out everybody with one shot or something like that. But I mean, you felt that dude's power. Everybody said it. Everybody said you felt his power, you know, just incredible puncher.
And it just went throughout all the divisions as well, man. You know, throughout the years as Hearns got bigger, even up into the late '90s, Hearns always still had that right hand. But same thing with me. Like, besides watching the ones I saw live with my dad on television, the first one for a young Hearns that I remember watching, we've discussed this many times, the 30 Great One Punch Knockout video. Hearns Cuevas is on that, and you know that like the Cuevas knockout for me, seeing that as a kid, that was almost like seeing how someone will go down in a video game or in a wrestling match. It was
Totally.
almost, yeah, like very exaggerated. You don't see a guy go like get hit like that, and then the way his body went, you know, kind of like a slinky, like he just, you know, did the whole like a worm right in the ring, completely.
He's doing like the hokey pokey or something.
Yeah,
He's,
totally. You know, he just know his eyes are cross-eyed everywhere. Cueva's never been hit like that in his life. All right, and before that, he could totally be someone we can bring up on this list because he was a devastating puncher. Cuevas was reigned terror on the welterweight division in the mid to late 70s, man. He was a beast. All right.
hell of a left hook.
That was his main shot more than anything. You know what I mean? Like, sure, he had a respectable right hand, but his left hook was his bread and butter. And it broke speed bags as well as jaws and eye sockets with very alarming regularity. Ask Billy Backus, who had his eye socket broken after just one round. Ask Howard Weston, a very, very capable boxer who probably would have been a champion in another era. Had his jaw shattered.
Harold Volbrecht, I want to say.
Yep. That was Cuevas' last title defense right before the Hearns fight. It's one punch, pop, and you saw Volbrecht fold, you know, like a piece of paper.
Yeah, not like a murderer's row, but a very respectable group of contenders.
Very, very tough guys, though, man. And all really tough, you know, fighter. Pete Ramsey, very, very tough welterweight contender from the mid 70s. Another guy that could have been champion in another era. Cuevas folded him in two. This is what Cuevas was doing to these guys. All right. Like, he was just absolutely demolishing them. And there was a lot of clamor by 1979 for Cuevas, Sugar Ray Leonard. That was the fight that everyone was ready to be made. And it looked like it was going to be made. After Leonard beat Benitez, that was the fight that it looked like it was going to be next. But for whatever reason, probably with Harold Ross Fields' money, because that was the promotion that put on this event, Tommy Hearns got the title shot next instead. And that, I think Cuevas knew the writing was on the wall for that fight. I think everybody kind of knew. Like, Hearns was an absolute freak. You know, the way Cuevas was destroying guys in title defenses, Hearns was doing the same thing, becoming a superstar in Detroit. And he was knocking out a lot of the same guys Cuevas was. You know what I mean? Angel Espada, Clyde Gray, Harold Weston. These are all really tough contenders that Hearns was just vaporizing out there and looking incredible doing it. You know, he struggled a little bit. Harold Weston gave him some issues a little bit before he got stopped with a detached retina. But these other aforementioned fighters, man, Hearns just treated them just like kid toys, you know what I mean? Shoe toys. So when the stage was set for this fight, man, I mean, everybody was really hyped about it. Like, two monster punchers. If this fight was happening today, boxing Twitter would be going gaga about it. But if you really, really looked at it, man, writing was on the wall. Everything was just wrong for Cuevas. He wasn't a master boxer. He was slow on his feet. He massively undersized against a guy like Hearns, who just had freakish dimensions for welterweight. And yeah, you saw it right there, right away after like round one when Hearns came out and just took control. Cuevas tried a few times throwing those swinging left hooks, but right away you can just see he was completely overwhelmed. Didn't know what the hell was going on. And once that second round happens, you know what Hearns starts doing, right? That was the thing my dad was pointing out to me too. Once he started measuring you, just run away because you know what's coming next. He starts measuring. You're like, get away. All of a sudden, boom.
Yes, right. You better do something because that right hand's coming.
And I'm pretty sure you can't get away with that now, not as much as you could in Hearns' prime, because most referees now like slap the glove down or do something. But like when Hearns was able to get away with that, and most guys just stood there and they just kind of waited for their execution, you know.
And he had a great jab too. It wasn't like he couldn't jab. It was just that, like, you know, once if you've ever even just hit a heavy bag and you kind of like, get that that's the range, you know what I mean? Like right there at the end of your jab is and that's when you kind of understand. And the same thing with Hearns, but he was so snappy and so like lengthy, and like his hand speed was incredible. So I mean, like, if you did not have incredible head movement or really good reflexes yourself, dude, that right hand was coming. You better get out of the fucking way. And a number of fighters found that out like really the hard way. But of course, he had a really good left hook. He had a really good jab. It wasn't like that was his only shot. It was just that was his obviously his Sunday punch. Don't let him land that right hand.
If it was gonna land, chances are you were gonna either go down or you're gonna get spaghetti legged and go down from a similar punch or a flurry right after that. Most guys, with the exception of a very few, were able to take a Tommy Hearns right hand and just be able to fight through it. Hearns was just a different animal. But the thing about that made him even more like difficult to fight was not only was he such a monster puncher, he was an incredible boxer. You can't really, if you look through his record, name one time Tommy Hearns really got outboxed. Like you couldn't outbox the guy. You know what I mean? Like you said, he had an incredible jab. He knew how to move in there. Once he learned how to clinch as well after the first Leonard fight. Like his game was even more like came to another dimension. Like his body work was incredible. Hearns, was the complete package. The only thing for him was that his chin could be dented, and if you can get to it, you could hurt him. But other than that, you weren't going to you couldn't outbox him. Sugar Ray Leonard was a master boxer, and Leonard had to turn slugger to get to him.
Probably the only fighter I can think of that was like, close to Hearns' prime that actually like had stretches of outboxing him was Benitez. And
Well,
that's like, okay,
yeah,
no
exactly.
problem,
Just
what's
made
Will for
everyone.
Benitez.
Yeah,
But I
man.
mean, so yeah, the generally speaking, you were going to have a hell of a time actually outboxing him and outfoxing him. He was a hell of a, he was very skilled. That was the thing. Is like, yeah, his right hand was scary as shit, but he was a really, really skilled fighter, incredible amateur, famous on the Detroit scene, which we talked about in our Kronk show, more than once. And he was like a local celebrity, dude, man. Pepino Cuevas going into Detroit against Hearns, and undefeated Hearns at that stage. I mean, that's the kind of thing where, yeah, he wasn't like used up or spent to that degree, but it's like you'd have to think that if you're Pepino Cuevas, like you can't feel like you're being brought into Detroit to win. You know what I mean? Like that's come on. We know how this works. We know how this game works.
He definitely got a shitload of money to be out there for that fight. And that was in the card, but like you said, the writing was totally on the wall for what was going on for that. Kenty, who I think was making his first defense for the title on that card.
Yeah, Kronk's first champion.
Yep. Hearns, like you said, fighting Cuevas, and then the other two fights were Ernie Shavers' wild ass brawl with Tex Cobb, which is always a fun one to watch, and the very underrated knockout of Sammy Serrano by Yasasumi Ohara.
Ooh, yeah, man, that is one like brutal guy just going limp knockout.
Crunch, yeah, man.
Caught on the ropes, just woof.
Totally.
Brutal.
Yeah, Serrano has no idea where he got splattered to. He woof, But yeah, it was a solid card. That was a solid card all around. I guarantee you that there was money lost on it too, because that's what happened with Muhammad Ali Promotions. They paid wild amounts of money, and boxers loved it because they were getting paid more than they ever had in their lives. And this was like the person they were looking for their entire life. But everyone was wondering, where's this money coming from? Where's this money coming from? Eventually, we figured it out, but we told that story before. I'm sure we'll tell it again. But anyways,
I mean, we're basically still telling that story today with certain promotions and whatnot overbidding for shit, and then that's
totally,
just how it goes.
totally. But as Hearns moved up, I say like Leonard had to turn slugger to beat him the first time. Otherwise, Hearns was going to beat him by decision. As he moved up, his power stood with him, and that's the thing that was like really fascinating. When he went to junior middleweight, where I would probably say he was at his absolute peak, just same thing. He was going the distance a little bit more against certain guys like Ernie Singletary and a couple others, but at the same time, when it really mattered, he was still just flattening fools. Obviously, his most well-known knockout, the Duran massacre. Roberto Duran goes without saying, one of the greatest of all time, but no one ever treated him the way Tommy Hearns did. Just we don't need to go into detail about it. Everyone's seen it a million times. But
Yeah,
like,
it's famous, one of the most famous knockouts. It's
dude,
you,
it's just a gunshot. Just like,
it's one of the craziest things to me about it is if Roberto Duran had not done as well as he did against Hagler,
mhm.
like had he, and don't get me wrong, because I personally don't feel like he almost won that fight. I thought Hagler won it, with a little bit of room to spare, but it was mostly just that Duran was coming up and he gave that great an effort. It was like he stayed in there, he didn't get clobbered and shit like that, because everybody was like, dude, he's gonna get fucking brutalized, and he didn't. He fought back and he did very well overall.
If
uh
it wasn't for those last couple of rounds, Duran would have won the decision. Hagler had to really push it. That was a close. I mean, like you said, I haven't watched it in a while, but for the judges, that was a really close fight.
yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, because it wasn't like a blowout, but I thought that Hagler won it with a little bit of room to spare. Even so, point being, however you scored it, Duran did well. He did way better than most people thought he would do. But had he not, or had it just been kind of like after he gets knocked out by Hearns, then that's it. It's like that would have just been the end of Duran's career. It would have just been like a sad knockout. Would have been like, damn, dude, Hearns did Duran dirty like that. That's fucked up.
Most people can never recover after a knockout like that. I mean,
Yeah,
like
that's how it would have.
macho guys ever. To see him get splattered like that was like shocking. I mean, sure,
I'm not saying he should have fought 15 more years. I'm just saying that I didn't. You would have excused him for retiring after that or something, but he didn't. So,
well, dude, here's the wild thing. Yeah, last night I was watching Roy Jones, Antoine Berg, of all things. Our boy Jay Seklo uploaded it. It was the full broadcast, so.
Well, then you got to watch it.
Exactly. But anyways, at one point they were showing the people in the audience, and there was Duran. It looked like it was still, even though this was like 1995, but it looked like he had the goatee going on. He still looked really angry, and he had jet black hair. And I was thinking to myself, Duran still had almost at least another 8 years of like active fighting going on before he was gone. Like after this, including another title fight and a couple of pay-per-view fights. And
yeah, it's like, dude, so like his first couple televised fights were in black and fucking white, bro.
insane.
Like, dude, Jesus, man.
And when he turned pro, like if you think about it, he turned pro only a couple of years. Like he almost like he's only a couple of years away from Robinson's last fight to when he turned pro. Like a few, you know what I mean? Not to say Robinson should have fought that long either, but
yeah, that's crazy. That is crazy. Yeah. And dude fucking stopped fighting after I graduated high school. That's nuts, dude. That's nuts. But I mean, to even be in the era, even kind of touching the era of Roberto Duran, as late as it was cool as fuck. But even so, Tommy Hearns just absolutely trashing Duran like that, though, treating him the way that he did, like nobody else ever treated Duran that way. Like you said, that it's an epic knockout for a reason. And going up, like you were also mentioning, going up in weight. I mean, you can't really give him too much credit, because like, yeah, he hurt Hagler, but like he like broke the shit out of his hand hurting Hagler. And it was like, that was basically the boxing equivalent of what's his name, fucking Thanos, like all that for a drop of blood, like bro, you totally just fucked yourself up and took yourself out of the fight. Just try to hurt me one time, you're fucked.
It reminded me of Meteor Man when I was a kid. Like, there's a scene when Tiny Lister, rest in peace, who plays obviously a thug, tries to go against Robert Townsend and punches him as hard as he can. He breaks his hand, gets all shocked that he did that, punches him with his other hand, breaks his other hand, and then just runs away. But I mean, like, Hearns hit him with his best shot. Hagler obviously moved. Hagler was a ball of granite. You never saw Hagler budge from anybody. And he did. He visibly stumbled. Like, not stumbled, but he was like, he took a couple of steps back, because that was a beautiful shot.
It backed him off for a second. Like, he was like, well, okay.
But as Hearns said in his legendary night show, in the HBO legendary nights afterwards, he was like, I broke my hand. He was like, he had a hard head, and he kind of laughed about it. It's true, like, and imagine after first round, you throw everything out there, you hit him with your best shot, you break your hand, now you got 14 more rounds of hell to deal with after that.
Yeah, dude. Well, and I mean, like, it was just the intensity of that first round, and not even the entire first round. It's like the first minute or so is just like, the release of endorphins between those two guys and how much adrenaline they had pumping. It was like I guess Hagler was ready for it, but Hearns wasn't. I don't know. But even so, being able to make Hagler think twice, a guy like Hagler, it counts for something. He obviously didn't get the win, but he did even score some fairly impressive knockouts after that and in other weight divisions too. I mean, like, the dude carried his power up. He had the stature too, I guess, the body type like we were talking about, but he was an incredible puncher.
Dude, he just, amazing. And even he was able to recover after the Hagler, like thrashing after that. Because a lot of guys, after going through a beating, and even though it was 3 rounds, Hearns did sustain a beating in that fight and suffered a broken hand. And a lot of guys, mentally, physically, everything, especially with someone of Hearns' stature and as proud as he was, and how big that fight was, as much shit as he was talking before the fight, that'd be hard to come back from. But to Hearns' credit, not only did he come back, he started thrashing fools again. And look at some of the guys he was taking out, man, at middleweight. James Schuler, who, tragic story of what happened to him, but at the time of the Hearns fight, undefeated on the verge of a title shot. And one of my favorite knockouts is because it's the way that Hearns like sets it up. Jabbing those left hooks to the body, which is just like a whip. You just and Hearns has one of the best left hooks to the body you'll ever see it. Because like I said, he just throws it with just all the torque in it, but it's just, it's beautiful how he just digs it in there. And Schuler obviously is like doubling over from it, but that sets it up for his right hand, which just folded him. Like, it's perfect, absolutely perfect.
And you don't often see the tall guys throwing body shots too.
You don't. And Hearns, the way he throws that hook, man, there was no one better. Like, he's such an underrated body puncher. I mean, real ones will tell you how good Hearns, how good Hearns was to the body, but to the average fan, again, like you said, they think about his right hand more than anything. But that's one of my favorite knockouts. Ron Roldan. Roldan, we've talked about him on other shows, just an absolute brute, from Argentina, same mold of Oscar Bonavena, Galendez, and other just really tough, hard-nosed guys that just really hard to knock out. Hearns was the only guy that really bounced him around the way he did. Hearns got hurt himself. That was a wild fight. But, Hagler wasn't able to bounce Roldan around like that. No other middleweight of that era was able to do that. Every time Hearns landed that right hand, Roldan was on skates.
Yeah, he was a he was a hard, sturdy dude. He was one of those no neck having fighters that was just, tough as shit to hurt.
He
But
beat the hell out of a lot of really good fighters too.
for whatever reason, Hearns just, he just, I guess, found that spot to land. One thing that Hearns, I guess it was probably because of his reach and because of the reach disparity. When fighters would try to like get inside on him and like, go down underneath his shots and stuff like that, they often wound up taking shots like right behind the ear, those kinds of shots. And that shit fucks you up, man.
Andrew Maynard's is a prime example of that. If you watching, again, that was the first one I watched with my dad. Hearns sets that up perfectly. He lands a couple of really vicious body shots on him, and then he starts hitting him again. And then like Maynard kind of turns away as he gets hurt, and Hearns throws one final right hand that kind of like looks like he's hit him in the back of the head, but it kind of catches him on the side in the ear area. Bop! And Maynard just boom and just collapses down in a heap and just lay there splayed out. And you heard Hearns grunt too when he landed. Hearns goes, oh, just like.
he was pretending somebody stole his fucking money or something, man. He was pissed.
No, but he had his ups and downs later on. Iran Barkley, for whatever reason, had his number because he was the only person to beat him by decision, as well as that incredible knockout he scored against Hearns.
Oh man. Yeah, that was just like so sad. Damn. Only because I've mentioned before, and as you know, Tommy's my favorite fighter, but it's I guess it's not sad in the sense that like, look, dude, those are great wins for Iran Barkley. Obviously, dude, the Blade, poor guy. Nonetheless, like, can hang his fucking hat on those wins forever. But damn, just as a fan of Tommy Hearns, it was like, damn. Just one of those guys who on paper is not in your class, but you just couldn't do it.
In that first fight too, Hearns was about to stop him. All right. Barkley was sliced up. He was beat up. It was only round 3, but he got the shit kicked out of him in the first couple of rounds by Hearns. And then Hearns started landing those body shots. Barkley was doubling over. And once Hearns was going in for the finish, that's when Barkley threw that right hand all the way from the South Bronx and came to the Las Vegas Hilton and landed right on Hearns' chin. I mean, an incredible shot. Hearns walked right in, and then Hearns just dramatically.
Yeah, his legs are just gone after that. Like that was the thing, was that like, you know, there were other fights where he recovered, but it was like once his legs went, dude, it was tough. It was real tough.
A bad knockdown. Like he went down, his head bounced, everything. Like he was completely cooked.
Man, brutal.
You know, but I mean, again, Hearns, to his credit too, like he had a long career after that. Every time it looked like, okay, it's probably going to be done. The Barkley rematch when he lost that, no. And then the thing about him was that like after he would, you know, either lose or have like a little bit of a hiccup, he would always just go on like a string of wins. Like he went on the Duran, he did the same thing Duran did. You know, Duran was always being featured on Tuesday night fights or other ones, just kind of fighting guys that, you know, not bad fighters, but guys that clearly are not going to win and whooping on them. And excuse me, shit. And eventually it would build up to a big fight. You know what I mean? And same thing with Hearns. You see Hearns then on Tuesday night fights beating up guys like Freddie Delgado or Earl Butler or this one or that one. And eventually, you know, he would always talk. There would be rumors, hey, he might fight Roy Jones. Thank God that didn't happen. I mean, look, yeah, I love Hearns too, but in 1995, Roy would have just ate him for lunch. And then there was talk about him fighting for the Cruiserweight Championship, and that was much more of like a prominent rumor for a while. So,
yeah, I remember that after the Uriah Grant fight. For even after the Uriah Grant fight, for a couple years, they were talking about like, you know, he's going to come back, and I just remember thinking
he did come back actually.
Well, I mean, like before that, it had been a rumor for a while because I remember seeing him at. Oh gosh, I want to say it was Taylor Hopkins 1, I think.
Oh geez, and there was talk that he might come back.
Something like I think that might have been it. But regardless, I can't remember exactly what fight it was. I just remember, and he came back not that long after that. Yeah. So in any case, it was just like But
there was like any cruiserweight champion from the early 90s up to the late 90s. There was always discussion. Ancelet Wamba, who was an early 90s cruiserweight champion. There was a bunch of rumors of him that he was going to fight Tommy Hearns. Didn't come through. Bobby Ches, they were supposed to fight. Robert Daniels, you name them, Al Cole, Orlin Norris, whoever. There was always talk that Tommy Hearns was going to jump in and try to, you know, get a title fight with them. And for whatever reason or another, none of those fights ever materialized. The only former champion at cruiserweight that Hearns ended up fighting was Nate Miller on the undercard, on the off-TV walkout bout of a Naseem Hamed fight. I forgot which Hamed fight it was, but it was like something like the late 90s, early 2000s. So it wasn't good. I watched a clip of it recently, and it was horrible, like horrible. Miller wasn't throwing any punches. Hearns clearly passed it, but at least was being active, and it just was not a good fight.
It picked up the IBO title. I mean, they're trying to turn that into the new WBO these days. They're trying to insert all these new titles. I remember
that for a minute. They were. I think that kind of lost some steam, though, didn't it?
Yeah, man, like at this point, I don't give a shit about these things, but you know, like, yeah, they were trying to kind of push that into the, you know, the 4-belt era. They're trying to make some 5-belt era. Nah, dude, we're not, it's not happening.
If we start doing that, and then we got to look back at the former, I would love to look at the list of former IBO champions. Now
start doing a whole lineage of the fucking, dude, that ain't gonna happen. I hope not. Who knows? It's boxing. But you know, Tommy Hearns, clearly one of the top punchers of all time in terms of entertainment, in terms of,
and it's the all-time favorite for everybody. You mentioned your favorite fighter, 9 times out of 10, they're gonna say Tommy Hearns is one of them.
And yeah, dude, very beloved even now. And now I guess now he's got to settle for squaring up on Ray Leonard on hot boxing with Mike Tyson. He's
Ray Leonard and Sugar Ray's out there wearing his Tommy Hearns Roots of Fight shirt, talking, you know, supporting his boy and talking about how much he loves him. I get Hearns is bitter. He totally won that rematch, but you know, it's all good, bro.
It's just hilarious, dude. The way, I mean, and yeah, I mean, Tommy Hearns, I guess, is just still sore about that shit, but
probably, man.
I'm sore about it too.
I don't know. I think Sugar Ray could take him now, bro. You be seeing his IG videos and the way he just be posting and
Yeah, unfortunately, I have no doubt as far as, just listening to them and looking at the shape they're in, there's no question, unfortunately, that Ray could take him now. But don't set foot in Detroit, though. Don't fucking set foot in Detroit. Um, Moving on to another puncher, though, and it's a guy that, I mean, we don't have to spend too much time on him because everybody knows about him, but he's another fighter who really should be mentioned in this conversation. That's Sugar Ray Robinson. A legendary puncher, absolutely legendary puncher. It's kind of a fickle thing when you're talking about boxing history. As you and I both know, the boxing history circles are kind of funky sometimes. Depending on who you're talking to, you might get some crazy answers like who is the greatest of all time. You might, if it's like a big group of people, the consensus is going to be Ray Robinson.
Yes.
If it's a small group of people, you're going to get some smatterings of, Harry Greb and Sam Langford, and there's going to be some Ezra Charleses, maybe a couple here and there or something like that, Henry Armstrong, but the consensus overall, greatest of all time, Ray Robinson.
Is that who you consider?
What's that?
Is that who you consider?
I don't know, dude. For me, it's like the top 5 is pretty like interchangeable. You know what I mean? Like
I have him in Greb. You can kind of flip a card sometimes with it, but Robinson's always been like one of my consensus. I love Robinson.
Yeah, and I wouldn't argue with anybody, and anybody who's got like a handful of fighters as their number one. I'm kind of like, yeah, I could see it. I see it for sure. I think there are a number of fighters who have an argument, but overall, resume wise, just purely resume wise, Ray Robinson and Harry Greb probably have the best arguments overall. And Ray Robinson, like just going down his ledger, you know what I mean? Like going down, if you have, for instance, I've shown it before, it's behind me somewhere, but the boxing register, really great resource. I remember I wound up getting that in like whatever it was, 2002 or whatever that edition was. And you could go through each fighter's resume and you could kind of like count up or compare like, oh, okay, this fighter fought, X amount of fellow Hall of Famers or whatever. And it's always changing because fighters are getting voted into the Hall of Fame and stuff. But even then, Ray Robinson's resume is like incredible. It just, there almost nobody else stands up in terms of just bulk, in terms of how many fellow greats he fought, or how many fellow really good fighters, or even just ranked fighters he fought. Like he went through these divisions. And so, that's kind of a really big part of the story. The other part is that he was an incredible puncher, in addition to being a great boxer, and that he could hurt you and potentially knock you out with either hand. I mean, I think that at some points it gets a little bit exaggerated because he has a couple of really eye-popping knockouts that are like, holy shit. But the rest of the time, it wasn't like he was just fucking sleeping dudes left and right, per se. He wasn't Julian Jackson like that, at least not all the time. But
when he had to be.
But when he had to be, or if you pissed him off, got him going, he got into a rhythm or whatever, it could mean your ass.
Well, I think my favorite way of how it was described was from the HBO's documentary on him. There was a part in it where they started talking about like, and it was matched with Wynton Marsalis, who was the music director of the HBO documentary and played all the music for him and his group. And there was a really cool piece. Like you heard the bopping right there. Like there was a drum solo started, and Teddy Atlas was the one that started narrating. He was a knock you dead puncher, knock you dead. And then the music started. You saw Robinson flattening a dude right there. Then they just started showing everything, the way he was moving, flattening guys left and right. And it was beautiful to watch because Robinson, obviously, we talked about it. If there was one boxer that matched jazz music as perfect as anybody, it would be Sugar Ray Robinson. They were just, match made in heaven. And like Robinson was just the perfect blend of speed and power and just of everything. Like you can't think of it. He was born and bred to be a fighter. Like some people are born to play basketball, to do this, do that. Robinson was just genetically born. Everything was just perfectly in line for him to be a fighter. Like there wasn't one thing he couldn't do, He had a beautiful jab. He had a chin that was incredible. You couldn't really, I mean, he could be dented, he could be dropped, but you couldn't really just, couldn't flatten him. No one ever really took him out in his entire career. The only time he was stopped was because of the heat. And, you know, if you didn't piss him off, he didn't mind carrying you for a few rounds or whatever it was, but he just knew, like, you, at his prime, it was impossible, man. He knew everything that was going on in the ring at one point, everything that was happening, where it was happening, how the flow of the fight was going, what punch needed to be where to get this opening there. And it was said too that like within a round or two, he already knew, completely figured it out, and everything was already done for. Like it was just a matter of time. And it was his punch placement too, man. Like he was just a fucking beautiful, vicious dude. If he got you hurt, he could viciously knock the shit out of you. And his left hook was really, really bad. His uppercuts were vicious. His right hand, his body punches. The dude would hit you in the kidney and can destroy you. Like, he's a bad, bad man. There's a reason why they consider him the GOAT. His people love to shit on old timers and be like, oh, they don't hold up, and Floyd Mayweather will whoop them and all that stuff. Watch any of his footage, man. Robinson holds up. Not only does his stuff hold up, it still looks better than anything you'll see today. And it's not even a question in my mind.
He was, excuse me, a multiple time Golden Gloves winner. He had started boxing from a relatively young age, but he had said that he knew from a fairly young age too that he wanted to be an entertainer as much as he wanted to be a fighter, that it wasn't necessarily the fighting per se that he enjoyed or liked, that it was, that it was like a task. There was something that he could master and learn and be good at. And that was something that he liked to do, that he liked to just like be better. You know what I mean? He liked to work on shit like that. And that was one of the things, is he had really great footwork, as just about anybody, has seen documentaries and stuff knows, because they've seen him tap dancing or dancing some other way. And he had incredible footwork. He had some great rope skipping routines and stuff like that. Easily one of the greatest rope skipping like entertainers and stuff when it comes to dudes in the gym.
Anything he did, bro. He would even be dancing when he was hitting the speed bag. You see him, boom, and then he would just do like a whole like dance, swirl, twirl, all this stuff, man. He was perfect.
Yeah.
Everything he did, it was just in rhythm and always just with a jovial, happy way that it just looked cool and effortless for him. And you just wanted to emulate that,
Our dude Corey Erdman recently wrote an article on Boxing Scene where he mentioned this, that Ray Robinson, who knew Miles Davis and who knew a number of other jazz musicians and kind of figured into that world for a little bit. Ray Robinson had also talked about just kind of the rhythm of fighting and the rhythm inside of his head while he fought, and kind of how he figured out opponents and stuff like that, and the way that rhythm dictated the way that he fought. I mean, you could even kind of see it obviously as you're watching him fight, but it also led to those brutal knockouts. It led to, walking Gene Fulmer into that left hook, which famously by Burt Sugar and several others was called the perfect left hook. Walking, Rocky Graziano after being knocked down, walking Rocky Graziano into a right hand that was probably one of the best like encapsulated moments of Ray Robinson's career, where it's like he was pissed. He wasn't having it anymore. He didn't want that fight going on anymore. And he was like, I think I'm just going to end it now.
Well, not
and
only that, man, Graziano, we've discussed him, and a monster puncher himself and a great fighter and kind of in his own way. I mean, I don't want to say like great, so much as like, really exciting and very popular. He just, time of the sign of the times. But anyways, yeah, that fight was considered kind of like a dream match, but everybody knew that like at that point Graziano was already years removed from being champion and all that other stuff. But he was still a dangerous guy. He was still a really popular guy, and obviously punched hard enough that he was able to drop Robinson. And Robinson was being cautious with him early on because he knew how wild that Graziano could be. And of course, Graziano was throwing those haymakers as wild as could be. And at one point during the exchange, boop, that's how Graziano caught him. He caught him with a right hand, kind of like grazed him. You said, what would you say, like over on the ear, top of the head?
Yeah, it was almost like a cuffing shot, kind of like it wasn't super clean, but like it was enough.
but it bopped him, and Robinson went down, slightly went down for a knee for like, half a second. He didn't even stay down for a 1 count. He just boop, got right back up, but it was considered a knockdown. So much that the
Yeah, it's
referee.
crazy, but it was crazy back then. Sorry, but like every so often I'm watching a fight from like the 40s or 50s and somebody gets knocked down and they're just like doop, and like the ref doesn't even say nothing,
Yeah,
but it
nothing.
is an official
Totally.
knockdown. And I'm like, so wait, what happened there? What the fuck? But
And like
yeah,
you said, Robinson now, like Benny Leonard, if you get your hair mussed, you're gonna be pissed off about it. He got his hair mussed, and he just got dropped by a guy who he feels was inferior to him. Now, like you said, he's pissed off about it. So
well,
what is he?
I don't know how true this is,
Okay.
but I mean, it just cracked me up. And I know that I think they might have mentioned something about this in one of the documentaries, but they said that before his big fights that were going to be televised, because not all of them were, he fought fairly often, but before his big fights that would be televised, he'd burn his hair, like like get freshly burn his hair to, I guess, style it just right or whatever, and that he would get pissed if his hair got fucked up.
I mean, I can see it, man. Robinson had a fine head of hair. Absolutely, he's probably the smoothest guy I've ever seen outside of the ring. One of them, at least.
He was a good looking fellow, he's a good looking dude, and
I
you
mean,
could see that he was a
he knew how
smooth
to
guy.
dress.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. Miles admired him, and used Robinson as kind of like a guide to help him kick himself off of drugs. So I mean, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, as we know now, there were a lot of demons. There was a lot of shit behind the
a
scenes, but
lot
at
of
least
demons for
his
Robinson, man.
public image, he's a very smooth dude.
I, when I was a kid, I loved Robinson. I still, admire the hell out of him, even though, like you said, there was a lot of outside. When I watched that documentary as a kid and found out he used his wife as a heavy bag the majority of their marriage, I was just kind of like, but that was the sign that, again,
Yeah.
not to be like, oh, it's whatever, but like there was a lot of people back then who were doing the same thing, and it's just, I don't know, it's not good shit. But yeah, Robinson was a womanizer. He did a lot of other stuff, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about, what he did in the ring and what he was able to do in that fight, especially we go back to the Graziano fight. Once he got pissed off enough, how did he finish it off? It was like a jab, 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 got him to the ropes, then bop, hit him hard enough where you see the mouthpiece go visibly flying from Graziano's mouth, and he just lays there
Like a fucking fish. Like he's riding some imaginary unicycle, just like yeah, his legs just cranking and shit.
Yeah.
Poor guy. I mean, like you said, it was the kind of fight where, like, I think a lot of people knew going in, Graziano had taken a lot of damage over his career. He was almost more of a celebrity at that point than he was a fighter, or his career is winding down. Ray Robinson, obviously, in terms of style, he had problem with swarmers. He had problems with fighters who were kind of like bruising physical swarmers. And Graziano wasn't really that way. He was a crude slugger, like that was his style. And so Ray, he might have gotten clipped, but it wasn't a good style for Graziano at any point in his career.
Nah, not at all, man. Graziano would have got blitzed in 2 to 3 rounds at any point, whether it was near the end at that point or whether it was way before he became champion. But at any point too, though, Graziano made fun fights with everybody. He was just a wild guy, and that's what he was popular. He was a fun personality. He told it as it was. He didn't really give a shit, and he would fight anybody, anytime, and always made for fun affairs.
Just don't be Bobo Olsen against Ray Robinson. you're gonna get one piece like fucking like 4 different
that's
times
another thing, man.
in like 4 different venues.
Bobo Olsen, God bless the guy, man. Great fighter in himself. That's one person you can call a great fighter because he was, and he has enough scalps on his resume to prove that.
Underrated, yeah.
Very underrated guy. And in another time, if Robinson wasn't around, he probably would have been champion for a longer point because he was a good champion, including he beat Kid Gavlin, who was the reigning welterweight champion, in a great fight, and a number of other guys, to the point where Olsen was flirting with moving up to heavyweight, the challenge, I think either Patterson or Marciano at one point. I'm going to say Marciano. Like he was feeling himself. You know what I mean?
That
I think
little comb over having little bastard.
I mean, Archie Moore kind of stopped him from getting too ambitious. But Bobo Olsen, unfortunately, the one guy that he couldn't do anything with was Sugar Ray Robinson. And the first two times they fought for the championship, Robinson beat him by decision. But when he came back again, well, was the first two times or just the first time they fought? How many times they fought for the title?
Uh, I think all 4 of their fights were.
Yeah, they were, right?
I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
So it was the third fight though when Robinson came back and Olsen was champion, where Olsen was actually the favorite. And actually rightfully so when you think about it, because Olsen was doing his best work of his career at that point. And Robinson, not only had he just come back, people thought he was washed. He had lost to Ralph Tiger Jones. Not a bad fighter at all, but a person that Robinson, any type of era, shouldn't have lost to. You know, I mean, Tiger Jones was the type of guy you beat before you became champion or while you were rising in contender. So, and Jones beat him pretty legitimately. So, I mean, a lot of people thought Robinson might have been done and Olsen would finally get his revenge, but instead, it was only 2 rounds. You know what I mean?
And
Like
that
Robinson
late
probably
that late career run is a big part of the reason why people were like, "Holy shit, he is great." You know, it was like, "All
yeah.
right, he's pretty great," but then he came back again, and people were like, "Holy shit, again?"
And when you watch the way he did it, like he catches him beautifully too. They were in an exchange, and then Robinson just cold cocks him. And there's like a close up video of it where you see Olsen, boom, catch a left hook, and his eyes are gone. He's unconscious right there, and he just out. And Robinson, I think, catches him with a follow up shot, and Olsen's out, and Robinson regained the title right there. It was like a beautiful combination, type of stuff that only Robinson could pull off. And after he knocked the shit out of Olsen, a very emotional scene afterwards where Robinson finally like kind of dropped his guard a little bit and he's holding the belt up and you see him like trying to hold back tears and he has like this fake smile on his face and when you see him he's like very just like what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, there's even a
There's a video
newsreel
for
of
it.
it too, I think.
Yeah, it's a newsreel. Exactly, it's a newsreel, and you see him there, and they're like, "Yeah, how do I smile, champ?" And he gives like a fake smile, but you just see the emotion. He's like, and he's kind of, but like it's heavy shit.
Ray Robinson, too happy for words. Yeah.
Yeah, and he
Yeah,
really
I mean,
was. Like he was just kind of like to say to himself, like, "F you all," because of um everybody written him off. It was a tough comeback for him. It really was.
I think that like I said before, he wanted to be an entertainer. He tried at a few different points of his career to kind of get away from boxing or to kind of, make boxing his part-time gig or something like that, and I think realized very quickly the expense of traveling with an entourage and his lifestyle. Basically, I mean, that's the long and short of it. He lived a pretty lavish lifestyle, got paid a lot of money, but he spent that money, like he
Totally.
he lived that money. And so I think that he realized pretty quickly that being a cabaret or tap dancer, entertainer, band leader, any of those types of things was not going to pay the bills the way that fighting could. And on top of that, like I said, he stayed active. When he was active, he stayed very active. And that's another thing that, I won't get into it too far, but something that a lot of people discount, a lot of the history types discount when they're like, I wish fighters could be more active today like they were back in the day. And it was like, dude, they weren't just active because they wanted to fight. Like they were fucking badasses who were kicking their wives' asses all the time. Yay. That's not the case. They were fighting because they had to fight because they were making money. Like that was how they made money. And generally speaking, you compare the purses of the fights then to the fights now. It's the big fights. They don't compare, for a number of different reasons, inflation, blah, blah, blah. But point being, yeah, dude, same for Ray Robinson. When he had come back, he realized it was because he needed that money, dude. He needed to fight.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it wasn't just for the glory or whatever. That doesn't make it any less glorious. But he was able to accomplish a lot in that kind of like not the final stretch, but that final good comeback.
He really was, and he did need the money. He thought he'd be able to go into show business, and yeah, he was a talented dancer, but he couldn't sing at all. And just when it came to the other, contemporaries of his time, there was definitely, there was a gap there. And I think he quickly realized that, hey, even though he's a popular commodity, if he tries to be an entertainer, it's not gonna, his star will eventually start waning. So he was still young enough and still had enough left that he was able to come back. And it was remarkable how he was able to do it because there was a lot of bumps in the roads. After he beat Bobo Olsen, like you said, he ran into the juggernaut of Gene Fulmer. Gene Fulmer is one of the strongest, most durable, awkward, just toughest guys you could ever want to fight.
Hard headed, just
Yeah, man, awful. And when you, and if Teddy Brenner's book. What was the if only the ring was square? Was it? Is that what it was called? Right?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And in his great book, when he talks about the first time he saw Gene Fulmer, and he actually didn't want to even put him on television. You know, he was like he saw Fulmer training, and he was like, "That's it." Yep. So there's a part in there where he talks about seeing Gene Fulmer for the first time, and when he sees Fulmer, and he was like sees Fulmer working the bag and at the gym, and he was like, I can't put this guy on TV. He can't fight. He was like, what the hell is this? He was like, who is this? You know? Because if you see Fulmer training, or if you never even see anything like that, and then you see his style, which is like this weird octopus crab swings at something you probably see from the early 1900s or from like just like a throwback era look as opposed to what was going on then. He looked like he didn't know what he was doing. Just like someone just got pulled from the street, that looked like he was strong and maybe worked in the fields, but had no idea how to fight at all. And Brenner was like, I can't put this on television. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, who is this guy? And they were like, no, trust this man. He just looks awkward, but he can actually fight, blah, blah, please, 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 And Brenner's just kind of like, well, there's nothing I can do. I guess I kind of have to, but what the, dude, are you kidding me? Like, if he fucking sucks, I'm going to be pissed. And then Fulmer ended up whooping the dude. Like, he, put on a very, very good show. And Brenner was like, wow, okay. And they had a fallout the next week or like a week or 2 weeks after or something like that. And Brenner was like, called them up. It was like, hey, your boy want to go in there again? And they're like, yeah, sure. So.
Yeah, dude. And I mean, actually, he had a winning record in 4 fights against Ray Robinson.
He did.
But it was that one, everybody remembers the one that Ray Robinson won.
And again, that's no one ever did that to Fulmer in his career, ever.
Not like that. Not with one shot. Not with, he had been overwhelmed before, but not like that. And there's a reason why it was called the perfect left hook. The setup is fantastic. The way that it's the type of stuff that you teach in a boxing gym. Looking down at a guy's midsection to hit him with the hook up top. Leading with body shots, like, putting money in the bank with body shots, for like a few rounds type of thing. And then looking down like you're going to hit him with another body shot and blip, just right on the point of the chin. Fulmer didn't even know what hit him. Like he got up and I can't remember. It might have been, I don't think it was that book. It was a different book. But when Fulmer got up, he was so like dazed, and he had talked about it too. There's a couple really good quotes surrounding that stoppage, like Fulmer, his post-fight quotes where he's talking about he saw Ray Robinson jumping up and down or whatever, and he thought that he was he thought that he was working out before the fight, and he's like, what is he doing over there jumping up and down? They're like, buddy, he knocked you the fuck out. Yeah. But and similarly, they were saying that like he wanted to go fight him, and he was trying to go fight him, and that he didn't understand why he couldn't, like, we're in the ring, why can't we fight? That he was just messed up. He was so scrambled that he didn't even know what was what. And I mean, now we having these conversations these days about like, don't interview fighters after they've been knocked out. Like there was no conversation like that back then, dude. They'll say, they had like Joe Rogan, like they have the memes and shit where he's like interviewing a dead guy, like same thing, fucking, they didn't care. But, Gene Fulmer just had no idea what planet he was on after that shot, dude.
Not at all. And you know what I always found kind of interesting? That fight happened in 1957, right? And that was in color. Like a lot of the video you see, that fight's in color. Mm-hmm. And that fight's from 57. So I always found that kind of cool.
There are 2 different bootleg angles of that fight too, from the crowd, where people had video cameras. Like, and I include one of them in one of the clips I have, but yeah, that's wild to me too. The people were like back then in the 50s sneaking in shit. That's because, pretty crazy.
Like, there's a lot of people out there now, and thank God for them because it's awesome, that do a lot of like, black and white videos, and they're doing like color conversions for them and stuff. But this was already like color converted way back on VHS and everything, So
totally.
As a kid, I found that kind of interesting, even more so because everything back then, including the 60s, Ali Liston 1, and a bunch of others were all in black and white. So for that one to be in color kind of stood out for me a little bit.
My sister's 10 years older than me. I was born in 1982, and I remember seeing photos of my sister just a few years before me that were in black and white. Wow. Or that they were like Polaroid and all like, crinkly looking fucking quality and shit.
We all got the Polaroids, bro.
Yeah. So point is we're old, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's wild that fight was in color. Then there's clips of that fight in color, but I mean, just incredible knockout, dude. Really incredible knockout.
I mean, that's the one that everyone says is the perfect punch. It's probably the most perfect knockout ever, administered on anybody. And that was Robinson's. I mean, he did, have his series with Carmen Basilio, but that was probably the biggest like highlight I would say of his second career was that knockout of Gene Fulmer. Like you said, Fulmer did get the better of their series, but Robinson arguably did beat him. I want to say in their third fight, which was like I think which was a draw. That's what led to that fourth fight. So
yeah, whichever one was a draw was honestly a draw, like very close.
But like, yeah, and this was Robinson way, way, way past it. You know what I mean? He still had that star power, and he had no business fighting up into the 60s. After he lost the belt to Paul Pender, he should have retired. He probably should have retired after the second Basilio fight, to be honest. But Robinson being him, and he needed the money, and still going on, he still lasted a long time. The majority of his losses came in like the late 50s, early 60s against totally inferior guys. Some of them were good fighters, but he still pulled out a couple of wins here and there. He was able to beat Ralph Dupas, and a couple other guys. But for the most part, he was losing more than he was winning. He was getting beat up. It just was sad to see. And then his final fight, which took place against another very, very underrated contender of the time, Joey Archer. And it's just like it's pathetic, man. Robinson gets dropped early, he gets outboxed the whole time. And there's a famous story where Miles Davis was ringside for the fight, and we talked about how close Miles was with Robinson, and they said that Miles, after Robinson got dropped in the first round, Miles started tearing up because he thought that Ray was going to get knocked out, and he was like, kind of just like, oh my God, to be able to witness that, he didn't want to witness that. And Robinson lost the decision and everything, but he said after the fight ended, Miles went to his locker room, opened the door, and told him, in his really raspy voice, he said, "Ray, you're packing it in." And Robinson just kind of nodded to him and, agreed.
There's a number of photos from, I want to say Neil Leifer or Leifer, however it's pronounced. Yeah. Apologies, because fucking incredible photographer. Some of the most iconic fight photos ever. Him and High Peskin, ridiculous.
Hanging with him at the Hall of Fame was cool, man.
Just absolutely incredible photographer. But I mean, what's that?
So many questions I still want to ask him.
Oh, dude,
get a chance to ask him that day.
I believe it was from him, but he photographed Ray Robinson versus Stan Harrington.
Okay.
And that was on that final stretch too. And man, it's like,
right?
What's that?
Stan Harrington from Hawaii.
Yeah, and I want to say they fought twice. I'm pretty sure they fought twice. It was like, back to back, like, and it did good numbers in Hawaii. So they're like, let's run it back. And there was just the photo series from it's like some of the most pathetic fight photos you'll ever see, dude. It's just an old dude looking like an old dude.
I think I know which photo you're even thinking of too. He just laid over.
Yeah. Well, and there's like photos during the fight and photos of him in the corner, photos of him afterward, and all of them just look so pathetic, dude. Yeah. It's like two totally different human beings. But like that's the story of boxing, you know what I'm saying? They say the punch is the last thing to go, but fuck that, the dignity is the last thing to go, I guess. It's or first thing, I don't know. Either way, it's sad.
But Robinson was still, even though he started developing issues later on in his life, he was still active in the sport. Later on, there are photos of him still working out with Alexis Arguello and other people, and he's like clearly there.
Yep.
He had hand wraps
Main
on,
Street Gym and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, man. And it's kind of cool. You'd be like, I wonder how what that looked like with Robinson working out with him, but unfortunately his downfall started soon after that. You know what I mean? But there is that video that I have put on Twitter a couple of times where it was probably 1985 or so, where J.B. Williamson, two random names out here, I'm going throwing some deep cuts, people. J.B. Williamson against Prince Mama Muhammad for the WBC Light Heavyweight Championship. So this is that era right after Michael Spinks and everyone else took off. This is that weird era of light heavyweights. But It's not what we're talking about here. Anyways, those were the guys that were fighting for the belt. It was in LA. So Ali is being introduced first, shaking hands and all that. Then they introduced Robinson. And by 1985, Sugar Ray is already suffering from the effects of either Alzheimer's or CT or whatever it is he got at this point. And he's struggling to get into the ring, and you hear him, oh, don't let him fall out. But Ali holds the ropes for him, and a couple other guys hold the ropes, and Robinson gets in there. And when Ali and Sugar Ray make eye contact, and you see Sugar Ray's face just light up like a kid, you know what I mean? His eyes and his mouth, like you could tear up watching that. It's the coolest shit ever, you know what I mean? And Ali grabs him and hugs him and whispers something in his ear, and Robinson is there with his mouth open and just shaking his head, and grabs him and shakes his hand again. And like, it's beautiful shit, man. It really is. And then Robinson actually gets emotional afterwards too, because he gets a standing ovation from the audience, and you can see it clearly affects him some way, and he starts tearing up, and his face contorts a little bit, and he goes in. And if you listen close, he goes, "My God," and he just goes, and he's crying. He's like crying, while like Jay Edson, I believe it is holding his hand up, and he's just sitting there, tears coming down his face.
I wish they would do that more these days. Bringing old champions to fights and stuff like that. I know it's tough right now because of the pandemic, but just in general, that's a tradition I would like to see more of. Just cool acknowledgement. Yeah, dude. Ray Robinson was Ali's hero. And I mean, just to turn around and see how many people saw Ali as a hero is pretty wild.
Oh yeah, man. And I not to go another flashback, but on when Arsenio Hall asked Ali one time in the early 90s, who would you look up to? Who was your hero? And Ali said Sugar Ray. And he was like, my hero is Sugar Ray. And then Arsenio Hall was like, oh, he was like, all right, Sugar Ray Robinson. And Ali was like, yeah, that was my hero. And then he was
like, not Ray Leonard, bro.
Yeah. And then he said, how about you? And then Arsenio goes, and he was like, being honest, he was like, the people that affected me, blah, blah, blah. He said, Martin Luther King and yourself. And the crowd started chanting. Ali shook his hand. And then Sugar Ray was like, and then Arsenio said something like, yeah, now you have to cut me that check after the show.
Man, there's a reason why Low End Theory name drops Arsenio so heavily, because that shit, dude was a cultural phenomenon. If you wanted to be like, if you were in any if you were especially in the black community and you were trying to make it and trying to get your name out there, like if you went on the Arsenio show, you were there.
Well, speaking of big punchers, who was on that same episode? Tommy Hearns.
Was that the one where there was like 4 or 5 fighters out there?
No. I think for whatever reason it was just Hearns. It was just Hearns and Ali. But Hearns was wearing the short suit. He was wearing a full-on suit with shorts. And you couldn't see it yet, but the best part was he goes, "Oh, so we're gonna bring Tommy Hearns on." And Ali goes, "Who?" He goes, "Yo, Tommy Hearns." And Ali goes, "He's here." And Arsenio goes, "Yeah." He points, and Ali goes, starts getting up.
Yeah, like he's gonna go get him or something.
And Arsenio starts playing around. No, you can't do that right now. And Ali fights again. He's like, he starts. And
he was always on. That was one great thing about Ali is that, not to get away from the puncher thing, but one great thing about Ali, and I'm not going to play like I ever met him, but from every story, everybody ever tells is that he had time for you. You know what I mean? Like, and not only did he have time for you, but he like looked you in the eye and was like, he had time for you. That's cool. Amazing guy.
Absolutely. Well, that's actually a good segue, because speaking of, Ali, probably, I think he said his best win of his career was against a guy that, when we were discussing punchers, we'd call this guy a freak. And when he's been discussed by everybody else just calls him a freak too. That would be George Foreman.
Man, I guess you can't really talk. We already talked about Joe Louis, but I mean, just in terms of heavyweights that were, just thinking about it, like my brain is starting to hurt. The kinds of knockouts George Foreman was scoring from like the early 70s, late 60s, actually, into the 1990s is just wild.
The best way to say it was to go back again to the HBO Legendary Night series. The late great Ralph Wiley said it best. He's not normal. He was never normal. When he hit Joe Frazier, I thought the world was coming to an end. Like, you know, and then you see Foreman, douche, and you see Frazier just skidding across the ring, and you see his glare. Foreman was one of the scariest, monstrous, like he was something that came out of a movie. All right, Foreman just came out of a different scene, bro. Like no one had ever seen anything like that. We had seen scary men before, like Sonny Liston and other brutes, and you've seen monster punchers like Joe Louis. No one had ever seen anything like Foreman. Foreman was just like a mutant back then to people because, you know, he was bigger than the average heavyweight. He was built different. He just looked mean all the time. He had this scowl on him. He had Archie Moore and Sandy Sadler, of all people, two scary individuals themselves in his corner as co-trainers. And it was like they were just, you know, it was like these two legendary fighters were just creating this Frankenstein and turning the wheels along with Dick Sadler of, you know, to terrorize everybody. And he was taking very, very good fighters like Joe Frazier, not even good, like great fighters, excuse me, Joe Frazier and Ken Norton and others, and just massacring them. Just like, it wasn't even close, bro. It wasn't like he was beating them down in 8-10 rounds or whatever. No, he was just stomping the shit out of them in 2-3 rounds. Everybody around. No one could do anything with this guy. And then, you know, you hear his background, you find out everything he came from, and you're just like, by God, no, man, the world is coming to an end. Who's going to stop him? There was a legitimate time where they thought no one was ever going to beat George Foreman.
Dude, and it was 1970. So Goyo Peralta, you know, is
bad individual, man. Doesn't get talked about enough, but one tough ass dude.
Would have probably been just an absolutely incredible cruiserweight. Just wasn't a very big heavyweight. You know, just didn't, he was just too in between, dude. Like he just wasn't big enough for the big heavyweights. And then just
for light heavyweight too, he fought Willie Pastrano a couple of times, but just couldn't get over the hump.
Yeah, he just wasn't, I guess he just, you know, just missed it. That his time, it was not his time, but he was a really beloved Argentine fighter. You know, he had fought just about anybody South American of note, you know, which I know people are going to hear that and go, huh? You know, but trust me.
Everybody over here too.
Yeah, trust me. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he put a whooping on some fools regardless, but trust me, it means more than you believe. But even so, it was like, dude, in 1970, 2 years after George Foreman had turned pro, and he was, you know, like you said, terrorizing. That's a really good description. Terrorizing the fucking heavyweight ranks, undefeated and absolutely just decapitating motherfuckers. Goyo Peralta goes 10 rounds with him. And the fact that he went 10 rounds with him, people were just like, this guy, you know, Goyo Peralta must have some sort of the point being that George Foreman was such a puncher that even just lasting 10 rounds with him was getting you some fucking free drinks. You know what I'm saying? Lasting 10 rounds with him was getting you some clout back home for sure. Because George Foreman was a monster. He's still a monster. He looks like an old man and he'd still beat the absolute shit out of me. All you need to look is like, dude, there's video on YouTube, there's whatever. Go look at video of him hitting a heavy bag. I hit a heavy bag. It's like, you know, it doesn't do anything when I hit it really. Like, I mean, it's on a chain, it moves, but like George Foreman hits a heavy bag and that shit looks like it's gonna die.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like, and I'm talking to even bigger heavy bags than I hit. Like, and I'm not like a tiny guy. He's just a massive mountain of a human being. And he's fucking monster.
Dude, we both, I think, put up the heavy bag videos where he just sits there and Dick Sadler, God bless him, because there's no way you could pay me enough money to hold that bag for Foreman to hit it. And I'm being honest, I wouldn't be able to either. If Foreman would hit it once, I'd go flying out the room. I sent you that video of me when I was holding that bouncy thing and I got nailed. Same shit would have happened. Anyways, I still got a stiff neck from that, by the way.
But that's Foreman would have done the same shit. You'd be sitting there sore.
If you watch that closely, you see a couple of times Foreman actually hits. Sadler is clutching the bag because he has to hold it like he's hugging someone for dear life. Otherwise, he'd go flying himself. You know what I mean? He wasn't a huge guy. He was a stocky guy, but he wasn't that big. And Foreman is hitting it. He had a very peculiar way of hitting the heavy bag. Most people, you see them working the bag, they're working on combinations and stuff, you know, boom, 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 whatever, right? Foreman, as most people, you know, And he worked on the same punch over and over. Like he would just kind of like do it in repetition. It was very interesting to watch and almost hypnotic in a way. Like you would just see him boom, 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 boom. And then he would go to the next arm, boom, boom, and just hit and hit. And a few times it would hit Sadler's fingers. And you're like, my God, man, how, why? And you'd see the dents in the bag. And then when he goes and uses that as a pro, it's just, and like if you watch early Foreman, like in his early career, like the first phase of him, people think, oh, he is an uncoordinated slugger because of what he was doing in the Ali fight, just trying to knock him out. Like, no, there was a lot of good aspects to Foreman's game. He just did about it in a different manner. But like he cut off the ring beautifully. He knew how to use the jab. He, threw his punches like he was the repetition that he used that to his advantage in there. And he's strong as shit. Like you just couldn't do anything with it. Anytime he got close to him, he just shove you and you go flying.
He was so physically strong. That's the thing, is just he was so big and physically strong, is that a Joe Frazier who could try to get under a lot of your shit and kind of like bully you because he could get under it. George Foreman was just like, no, he's so physically strong.
And if you watch it, he actually says that shit. Like Eddie Futch said that surprised him. When they had the fight, Eddie Futch had already said a few times that he was like, you know what, I was actually a little like, he didn't like the way how Frazier was training in Jamaica. He was out there singing karaoke because Frazier loved to sing, and he was doing a bunch of other stuff. And I guess Ken Norton was actually giving Frazier the business in sparring. That was the story. Norton was like beating Frazier up a little bit, and that usually never happened. And so, clearly, he didn't like Eddie Futch didn't like what was happening. So he was like, he was like, listen, he told Norton, he was like, enjoy yourself, just stay on vacation. You're done sparring. I don't want you fighting with him anymore. And he tried getting Joe in shape, but he thought he had him in enough. But when that fight started, the first thing, Frazier starts moving in a little bit, all that. And the way Foreman just shoves him once and Frazier goes skedaddling him back, Futch was just like, uh-oh. Like, I don't think he expected that. No one did. And the Frazier went back too. Everyone's just kind of like, ah, shit. And then Foreman just started churning. You know what I mean? Walks in, boom, doosh, doosh. You're like,
there was no stopping him. Yeah, there was nothing in his way to stop him. And that was what was so, dude, look at Frazier. Just take a look at him, how thick his legs are. And he himself was like did
absolute
labor.
Yes.
Yeah, he was strong as fuck. So that's the thing, is that it's I guess at some point it's just the leverage and the size. It does take its toll, dude. It does matter. Obviously, there are punchers throughout history. Well, we got some time to talk about more today, but there have been punchers throughout history who have been able to close that weight gap with how good a puncher they were. It's just that there is a limit to that. There is going to be some limit to that. There is eventually going to be like size matters, and in this case, Foreman was just too big, too strong, wrong style.
It was just bad, man. There was no way Frazier was going to be able to do anything with him, and he couldn't. And the way in, and Cosell with his all-time great call, down goes Frazier, and like, for all you can say what you want about Cosell, about him being a dick because he totally was, and whatever else you think he's overrated, underrated, whatever. But you can't deny that was an all-time great call. That whole thing was a masterpiece. What he did in Jamaica that day, like he just from start to end, he was amazing, and that was all him on his own. Like he killed that. But that just added to the drama of the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
But the way Foreman just after he destroyed Frazier just looking completely just bushwhacked. And Foreman, I mean, he celebrated a little bit. You can see him smiling. He showed a little. He was happy slightly, but he still had that cold demeanor to himself, just another day at the office for him. But it was after that too, man. It wasn't the Joe Roman fight that got people thinking he was going to kill Ali, because that was just everybody knew that was going to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and on top of that, Roman had like talked a bunch of shit like going into that fight, and
I never even knew that. I never realized that. I've just seen the beatdown. I never watched the whole up to it. That in the introductions, in the final instructions, Roman like kind of growled at Foreman or something, or like yelled at him. He was like, ah! Something stupid like that. I'm just like, Bro, are you
he
serious?
had talked a bunch of shit like leading up to the fight. Foreman had gone out around town in Tokyo and was like doing talk shows and all
Yeah.
sorts of stuff like that, like, going out. And I mean, I'm not trying to be culturally weird here, but dude, I can't imagine that seeing a dude that's like 6'3", 6'3 and a half. He had a kind of a funky fashion sense too. George George sometimes he was wearing like overalls that were, and then he had the hat and shit, and
I
so
like
he's
Jordan
like
style, man. It's pure
he's like
70s. It's like
he's
country 70s.
literally out walking around in public in Tokyo, and there's crowds of people because they're just like, what the fuck, bro?
Haven't
He's
seen anything
obviously
like that.
sticking out is the point. And anyway, but Roman was talking a bunch of stuff in interviews leading up to the fight, and then he like did something or yelled or something like that during the introduction. And then I guess, well, you could just see it during the fight, dude. Foreman just walked through his ass and like was hitting him while he's down, standing over him and shit after he knocked him down and just kind of like straddling him, putting his dick in his face, basically, type of
Yeah, it
shit.
was bad. It was bad.
Just brutal stuff. But then the last shot where he just goes limp and like crumbles into like a heap, like a
Yeah.
literal heap of human being. That's a brutal knockout. And it is Jose Roman. So I'm not trying to say beat, but dude, that's brutal.
There's a pretty, I'm sure you know about this photo. There's a pretty like, wild photo after the fight where Roman is laying on the canvas in a fetal position, his eyes completely glazed over. And he's like laying there like that, right? And Al Braverman, I want to say it was his manager, or I think it was Al Braverman was his manager. And he's yelling at the referee, getting into her, not even looking at his fighter. Roman's laying there like there on the canvas out. And Braverman is arguing with the referee about how Foreman hit him while he was on the ground, which he did. But like he's
He
arguing with
did.
him instead of trying to like look at his fighter who's clearly over there and like going through God knows what in his body, in his brain. And there's a bunch, 15 different traumas happening at the same time. And instead of worrying about him, who's like, just shaking and shook.
Like out of body experience and
Yeah,
shit. Like, get this
totally,
guy to the
man.
fucking hospital.
It's a wild photo because he's there. He like there's a photo of him. He's pointing, and they're like going back and forth, and then you just see Roman laying there, just out, completely gone. But it's what he did to Ken Norton because Ken Norton had beaten Ali, giving him all these fits and everything like that. And then what he does to Norton is just like Norton. We've talked about him in punchers and everything like
Oh,
that.
poor
Or Ken
Norton, dude.
Norton, but this was bad. Like I don't think Norton, when he saw what Foreman did to Frazier in Jamaica, had any idea that this would happen to him one day. But like,
Yeah,
you
dude.
know, not only was it bad, it might have been even worse because like Foreman just obliterated him badly.
It's just something about Norton and his style, that kind of like the kind of like uppercut and kind of wide hooking uppercut type of, like, he couldn't get away from those punches, dude. That was the key to beating that kind of crab defense that he tried to always employ. And he could, against boxers, like, just he was a total nightmare. But against big punchers who would throw that shot, he couldn't get away. And he couldn't get away from Foreman, and obviously because of Foreman's strength. And Norton himself was strong as fuck. Physically, he's very strong guy, but could not get away, could not keep from
Norton
Foreman.
was shredded to gills, man. The dude was an Adonis, but
Yeah, and Foreman
he was
just pushed
shitting.
him into a corner. Just
Yeah,
pushed him right into a corner and just fucking brap, 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 whooped his ass. And the entire story behind that fight too is like borderline hilarious, basically getting stuck up by Venezuelan fucking authorities and trying to getting taxed before leaving the country, to the point where they call it the Caracas Caper, because it was just a total shit show. And we've talked about that too. We did a whole show about exotic fight locales, and we
yeah.
talked about the whole, this is just what happens. It's like it's combination of like sports washing, where there's like dictators are trying to bring this sports in to make the country not look so bad, like they didn't just try to commit Jewish fucking genocide or something like that. Like it's crazy, dude. Like, this is pretty much how it always happens. But in any case, yeah, the whole thing turned into a shit show, and Ken Norton winds up just absolutely obliterated, his third loss against George Foreman, dude.
Yep.
Ugh, brutal.
It was really really bad. But like, Foreman loses to Ali. That's been gone over for verbatim, and then his career even though he has a few, like, he has the Ron Lyle War, which is still, beloved up till today and probably will be long after we're gone. And a few other fights. But after the Jimmy Young fight, people figure, that's the end of it. There was a couple of rumblings of, they were hoping Foreman would come back in the late 70s and maybe fight Larry Holmes or whatever because the money was still there. But for the most part, it looked like, he had rode off. And so when he came back in 1987, everyone was just kind of like, wait, what the fuck, really? And in his first years that we've talked about before too, especially with the people he was aligned with, Rick Elvis Parker of all people and stuff, it was, it was a joke, man. Foreman was just going on the circuit and just beating up no hoper after no hoper, small guys, whatever.
And honestly, it was getting away from Elvis Parker was a big part of making his comeback more legit. I mean, go listen to that show we did.
Absolutely. But yes, totally, 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 totally. But what really, people still had questions about him. I think what really happened was around 1990 when he fought Jerry Cooney, another monster puncher in himself. That's when people started like taking a little bit of notice, like, whoa, okay. Because look, Cooney at this point was completely gone himself. All right. Cooney, the early 80s was his early, once he lost to Larry Holmes, everything unraveled for him. He started losing, his career never really took effect. He'd have a couple of fights. He took a year off, had a couple of fights, take another year off. Then finally, he get a big fight with Michael Spinks, got his ass whooped in that one, kind of took, retired again. Now all of a sudden he's fighting in this weird freak show come Crossroads. No one really knows what to make of it. Fight with Foreman. But he still has enough name and he's kind of, not worn out enough. And he's younger than Foreman that they think this is, a sellable fight. But it's the way Foreman just thrashed him. And not only that, not like took a solid punch in the first round too, because Cooney hurt the shit out of him with a left hook. And Foreman like visibly wobbled, but it's the way he finished him in that second round where people were just like, oh snap, because he walks in there, you know what I'm talking about, right? The first way he drops.
Oh, dude. That walk away hook uppercut.
If the finish, yeah, just like he's throwing out the trash. That's the way I've been describing it, because he just casually walks away, just casually boop, boop,
yep.
Pow!
Couldn't give less of a shit about doing anything at all.
It's the most, and that's the thing about when I say about freak punches, man, because it looks like Foreman's not doing anything. He just literally just walks up, doop, boop, boop, boom, boom, and Cooney just drops like a redwood.
That's why every single time somebody's talking about Michael Moore fight and they're just like, it's fixed. And I'm just like, dude, you just don't know. You don't even know anything. You don't know anything. Just look at this guy. Are you kidding me? Like, he just needs to move his hands. He doesn't need to like reach way back.
20 stitches that the doctors put in Moore's mouth after the fight are fixed too, right? That was fake.
You kidding me? Come on, dude. Absolutely ridiculous. That Cooney fight, dude, like, Jerry was in really good shape. He sounded good. He still sounds good to this day. He's has not taken a ton of punishment, wasn't used up to that degree, was just obviously past it. Yes. But like you said, could punch. There's you can see, I think on YouTube, there's that interview after the fight with Foreman on like Letterman, and he's got a bad black eye, dude. His eye's all swollen and fucked up from taking that one punch from Jerry Cooney. That one shot. That was it.
Cooney was considered the hardest left hooker since Joe Louis in some circles, man. He was a bad dude.
And even Foreman said during that interview, he was just like, Letterman or whoever it is like, rate the hardest punchers. And he's like, well, Jerry Cooney's up there, dude. Look at my eye. You fucked me up.
And that's why Foreman started stepping on after that. He was like, all right, man, I can't play with
this. Exactly. He was like, no, this ain't going any deeper, dude.
That was here. Wind up, uppercut, boom, boom. But so he fights Holyfield, puts up a respectable challenge after that, and then he kind of treads water a little bit, loses to Tommy Morrison, another monster put. All that other stuff, right? So, like, again, going to the Michael Moore fight, Foreman doesn't deserve this title fight, but, he gets it off in name value alone. And it looked like it would be an easy one for Moore for his first title defense and, against a big name anyways. But like you said, man, the last thing to go on anybody is a puncher. George Foreman's 45 years old at this point. He's slow. He's clearly not the guy he was at 1990, let alone the fighter that he was back in the 70s. But he still knows how to throw punches in combination when necessary. And he's still savvy in there, even though he's slow in molasses, he's still savvy enough to like maneuver a guy into his bullshit if he can, and that's what he was doing with Moore throughout the fight. Like Moore kept on like, was outboxing, but Foreman, you would notice too, every so slightly all the time, like would take him and kind of like, because he's so strong, like you said, by the hip and just kind of force him into the side where he'd be able to hit him with something and keep him honest, and then Mora would start going at Foreman, like inevitably would start moving into his range. And then finally in round 10, Foreman was having a good round. He's landing a couple of shots. And Gil Clancy, all-time great trainer, but a guy who trained Foreman in the 70s after Foreman lost the belt. And so I think he was in his corner when he had the Jimmy Young fight. So he probably didn't have the best, the best experience with him, obviously. Was, kind of talking junk throughout the fight. Foreman don't have the power forward. George is just tired. He's still trying, but he can't do it. He can't do it. Oh, yeah, Atlas, again with the Atlas. That's his last comment. Atlas, again with the Atlas. Boop, boop, and that was the last combination. But what Foreman did, if you saw it, the first one, boom, boom, he hits him with a 1-2, solid shit. And more, as he said later on, he was already out on his feet. He stops right there in place. And then the second 1-2, bop, bop, hits him with a second 1-2, and that's when he splays out. And you see the blood start welling up immediately in his mouth, and he just looks up and he's gone. Like, he's completely gone. And there's no way that was anything, that he just became the 60-something, 60 or whatever knockout.
Yeah. I mean, it's just one of those things that people just say. I mean, whatever, but there's just no fucking way, bro. There's no fucking way.
And it was a beautiful thing. That was a beautiful moment, and one I'll never forget as long as I live. That's what made me a lifelong boxing fan. That knockout turned me.
Yeah, I remember that too, actually. Yeah.
It really did. I never experienced excitement like at that point the way I felt when I saw that. I never lost my mind. It was just something, like I knew I witnessed something incredible. And it was just, and then
I remember that too, actually.
It happened, made it even better, because like I just knew everything. It was incredible. Like, I just never experienced anything like that. I was just like, oh my God, this wasn't supposed to happen. It just happened. And it, like the way Lampley goes, it happened. Foreman literally looking up at the sky seconds, as Lampley says that, looks up and then just drops to his knees in prayer. Just like, you can't write it. That's a fucking movie. You can't write a script better than that.
Yeah, it's a good call. I will say it's a good call. And it's a call that Jim Lampley has been like, he's gotten mileage out of that for years. And he will continue to try to get mileage out of that. I mean, and then he'll fucking cry about
Gil Clancy. You almost had Gil Clancy ruin it, because immediately after, they just could have left that after he said it happened. Clancy starts going, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Here I am, a guy I said wasn't a puncher, was too old. You're like, Gil, just shut up for a moment.
It ain't about your call, dude. You're supposed to add to the moment, not fucking take away.
And you're just going on, just yambling, and just let the moment have for itself right there. It happened, just let it be. And there you go, rambling about how you can't believe what happened. Like, bro, shut up. Clearly you thought this wasn't going to happen, and it happened. You get it.
And Foreman, that was the last knockout he scored, dude. I mean, it's not like he one thing that that the Holyfield fight showed, and we talked about this recently too, the Holyfield fight showed that Foreman's name was still massive and that he could command a lot of money. And so then like I said, we talked about this and the way that the title kind of shifted around and all that type of shit. And, Foreman and Holyfield at one point might have fought a rematch had the title not gotten kind of kicked around. But, in the meanwhile, as Foreman was trying to get trying to get a shot again, he got beaten up quite a bit, dude. Just even the Alex Stewart fight, dude, that did a lot of damage. There were a number of fights where even if he scored a knockout, they were like 8th, 9th, 10th round knockouts. He was going rounds, dude. He was taking damage. He wasn't moving his head a lot. He was kind of just wading in there and like knocking dudes out, but it was taking rounds. And so I think that by then,
got hustled by Tommy Morrison.
Yeah, dude, it's just, you're going in there again and you're having that much trouble with a guy like Axel Schultz, like you're going life and death with Big Lou Savarese. Yeah. It wasn't good, dude. It wasn't real good.
Fight, you know what? The Briggs fight was a good send-off for him, because everybody knows he won that fight. And for him to perform the way he did against a guy like Briggs, who everybody, was really high on, but realized it wasn't. But still, the guy is so much younger than Foreman. And Foreman still kind of beat the brakes off him in the way he did. Like, that was the perfect send-off for him, because what was he going to do? Fight Lennox Lewis or somebody at that point?
Yeah, no, dude, at that point would have been hurting bad.
I mean, the only fight I wish, and I know you agree, and a lot of people do too, that I wish he could have fought was Mike Tyson in 1990. Like
He's
I'm even thinking about that today. I still like drool thinking about that because like it would have been the time was right and it should have happened when they had that doubleheader on HBO when Foreman flattened Adelson Rodriguez and Tyson knocked out Henry Tillman. But as I've said before, and other people won't agree with this because they're Tyson fanatics or whatever, but it's the truth. When Don King and others saw Foreman knock the shit out of Rodriguez the way they did, because they were all about the fight beforehand, but when they saw that,
with his heads all like cocked. Yeah, dude,
yes,
that's a bad.
Everybody pumped the brakes on that fight immediately afterwards, and they're like, "Hold up, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't do this quite right," because I think they saw what would have happened. And I'm sorry, but I think Foreman would have stomped Tyson in 1990.
Yeah, and I think that it's tough to say because Foreman a couple times said some shit like, "Oh, I don't think I'd fight Tyson. He's too fast and stuff like that."
No,
But
he
then
won.
there were other times where he was like, "I want Tyson. I want that. I want to fight that guy." So I mean, I think that if it came down to it, Foreman would have fought him, and he probably would have beat him, dude.
And in
Honestly,
1990, we're talking Tyson was at his chaotic worst. He had just lost to Buster Douglas. He's going through all kinds of
yeah,
stuff outside the ring. He's definitely, his training and the people he's aligned with, not
it's
Kevin.
not the best style for him either.
Oh, no. And I think Tyson would even admit that too. It just was going to be all bad for him. And Foreman was at, like, in terms of his comeback, Foreman was at his peak around 1990, 91. So, nah.
And I mean, I know that Tyson's a different kind of puncher. I'm not saying he's not, but I'm just saying that, like, Mike generally wasn't sleeping dudes with one punch.
No.
People can get mad all they want, but he was a combination puncher, and it was
And
his.
Foreman could take a shot, man.
That's what I'm saying.
Foreman could take a monster punch.
Yeah,
So
it was his speed and combination punching and his footwork as a heavyweight that was like people were like, holy shit. But it wasn't the one punch power per se. That's where people get it twisted, because the nostalgia, it clouds so much.
Especially when he's knocking the shit out of guys in 1985 and 86.
And like, I get it,
fond memories of him
flattening
all those.
I get it. But it's just that I don't think that he's taken Foreman out with like a punch or a combination or two. And when that doesn't happen, I don't think Mike reacts well.
Because Mike's, as the level of competition for Mike went up, he started going the distance a little bit more. Yes, he knocked guys out too, but it wasn't in the first round like it used to be. And
or not without trouble or something.
Yeah, Quick Tillis took him 10. Mitch Green took him 10. Bone Crusher Smith took Bone Crusher Smith. Tony Tucker. Look, I'm not going to say Smith didn't really try in that fight. He kind of hung on and did whatever. But I mean, like, he still. And Tony Tucker actually gave Tyson a little bit of trouble in that fight. And
there were a couple of like taller dudes who just had good jabs that could kind of like clinch him and
giving Tyson the business for 2 rounds and looking incredible before Tyson really turned it on and knocked the shit out of him. So like, I'm just giving you a thing. By 1990, when Tyson's life was complete chaos outside the ring and everything like that, and Foreman was peaking in terms of his comeback, I think Foreman would have whooped him. It would have been a good fight, but I think Foreman eventually would have stopped him.
Yeah, and it would have been a massive fight, but I think that would have been a good time for Foreman to do it for sure.
Yeah, and it would have been peak right after that, but he had to be brought up. So who do you got?
All right, let's see. You know what? I'm gonna talk about this dude because he should be talked about. Let's see, we've got a little bit of time here. I'm gonna talk about Sam Langford. Now, it's a little bit tougher, obviously, because as we've talked about on other shows, sometimes it's more difficult to assess fighters when you don't have nearly as much footage of them, of course.
Of course.
But as we've also talked about on other shows, it's a lot easier when you have footage of fighters they've kicked the shit out of, or fighters who have beaten them. But often is the case, for Sam Langford, dude, we have footage of fighters he's defeated and fighters he's absolutely kicked the shit out of. Mm-hmm. And some footage, of his fights as well. And we could see that, you brought this up earlier, talking about old fighters and stuff like that, like with Ray Robinson and fighters holding up, like their style holding up now. And Sam Langford's style holds up just fine, dude. It holds up 100% perfect.
Oh, totally.
The kind of guy who, kind of like we were just talking about with Mike Tyson, used his footwork to kind of create angles and like work around his opponents and stuff like that. That stopped as he got heavier. Like when later on in his career at heavyweight, like he got pretty fat. He was not moving around like that, I'm sure, but he could still punch. But the point being, he fought from like lightweight-ish, welterweight, all the way up to heavyweight, and was holding his own at heavyweight. Like not like, what's homeboy's name who was fighting at junior middleweight a couple of years ago and then was competing at cruiserweight. Guillermo Jones. Not like homeboy, where it was like, he was competing in a division where it was like, not quite as good and whatever. But no, like we're talking about, he was actually competing against very good fighters at heavyweight, like fought fucking Joe Gans.
I was gonna say that, man. Fought Joe Gans all the way to Jack Johnson.
I mean, and not only Jack Johnson though, but like the whole host of like heavyweights that he needed to fight, and multiple times. That's what's so crazy, dude, is that in a number of these fighters themselves from their own mouths were just like, that guy was a bad mamma jamma. He could punch.
And he was just, he was brilliant in the ring, dude. The way he would throw combinations, his footwork, everything. Like you said, his style holds up. It was beautiful to watch. There's a really clean clip of him in his fight with fireman Jim Flynn, where he knocks out Flynn, that racist, bumbling idiot. And
guy was awful.
Just awful guy, man.
An awful human being.
In all aspects, man. And when he fought Jack Johnson for the title, he just gave up after 2 rounds and decided to use his head as a battering ram, trying to like low below Johnson with his head to give him headbutts to the groin before he finally got disqualified.
Yeah, two fights in a row. 2 fights in a row, he called Jack Johnson the N-word, and then like 3 seconds later got knocked clean out. Like Jack Johnson was like, what? And then just fucking knocked him out. Like, I wish I had footage of it just so that I could be like, here, watch that and shut the fuck up. It's awesome.
There is a clean clip where some historian restored fireman Jim Flynn, Sam Langford. I forgot which fight it was, but it might have been that rematch, whatever. But you see before the fight, Langford looks like he's chewing gum and he just looks really confident in his robe and he's just shaking hands with everybody. And same thing, but during the fight, there's like one part, like Langford's completely in control throughout it, kind of neutralizing Flynn and stuff, but Langford threw a punch and kind of fell off balance, right? Bro, he does a cartwheel. Like, he literally does a cartwheel, and then in the middle of the ring, I'm not even bullshitting. Like, he throws a punch, he falls off balance, kind of did a mini cartwheel, got himself back on balance, and landed an uppercut immediately afterwards, like in fluid motion. Like, that was the type of shit he did. You know what I mean? Like, this wasn't something he wasn't doing acrobatics every fight. It was just like,
yeah. It just so happened he fell off balance and was like, whoopsie daisy.
Like, he literally caught himself with his glove, flipped over a little bit, and just boom, caught himself again, came in over. I'm just like, bro, what? It was awesome. And then the way he knocked him clean out. And he did that to plenty of heavyweights, 10 times the size of him. And what's even more brilliant about him is that he was able to do that when like he was losing his eyesight. He lost his eyesight, relatively in the middle of his career, and he fought for years and years and years while his diminishing eyesight, to the point where there was, stories, because there's all kinds of stories of him, but there were stories that he said near the end of his career, he literally was getting in and just kind of touching the ropes and everything else to feel where he was, because he couldn't really see anything else. Everything else was just a haze for him.
Well, you just look at him from his later years, and bro, you've seen the thickness of his glasses. Yes. Like they joke Coke bottle glasses. Like they're like fucking that thick. Like
yeah.
And I don't even know what that's doing at this. You know what I'm saying? Like, is that even doing anything? I don't know. But another thing about Sam Langford too was that throughout his entire career, and we've talked about this before, and I'm not going to go on a rant about it too much, but just to kind of point it out, but then a number of black fighters around this time, even extremely famous cartoonists who are generally speaking beloved in popular culture, Robert Edgren, for instance, drew some absolutely awful shit about black fighters in general, but in particular, I don't specifically know why, probably because he was so fucking good, like zeroed in on Sam Langford. Like, you can't even find any like nice cartoons about Sam Langford. Just about every single one is depicting him as some beast or some sort of animal or some sort of weird like tribesman or something like that. Every single one has him speaking with like a super thick lisp and calling himself Tham with a th and shit like that. I mean, all sorts of racist tropes, bro. Like, they were on him. It was awful. And his entire career, dude, the guy's like 5'7". You know what I'm saying? He's a small little dude. And on top of that, just knocking these dudes out or outboxing them, generally speaking, and having to compete against bad press or what was basically press that was belittling him at every turn. Just shitty stuff, dude. And despite that, still wound up having a career as great as he did and never wound up getting the title shot that he felt he was deserved and almost certainly, deserved, but also even later on in life, never even like begrudged anybody, wasn't even like mad about it, didn't really live mad about it.
He was cool about it, man. And he was probably more like, and as most people will tell you, man, he was more respected and well liked than Jack Johnson clearly was. Like people would say, if Sam Langford had become champion in that era, like I'm sure there would still be grumblings, and there would obviously be a lot of like um, um, great white hypes trying to find or whatever it may be. But at the same time, they would still just kind of be like, you know what? It's like they can respect him more because Langford was a low key guy. He didn't really try to cause any trouble or anything. He was just a prize fighter. He just wanted to shot like anybody else. He wasn't out there trying to be braggadocious and trying to talk a bunch of shit and marry random white women and just generally pick at the public and try to antagonize them. Which in my own way, I respect Jack Johnson for how he was and what he did, but like Langford was just a whole different animal.
Yeah, he was more of a pure fighter, like definitely more of a yeah.
And even their styles were completely different. What I mean by that, like totally different. Like Langford went in there, he was much more pleasing to watch. Much more pleasing to watch than Johnson. Like you said, if you watch their styles and how they hold up today, Langford's style holds up a hell of a lot more than Johnson's does. Like Johnson,
100%.
His style could play out today, especially in the heavyweights of the way they clinch a lot and different things like that. But Langford's style, man, he'd be a superstar.
Yeah, we've talked about that before, and just Jack Johnson's fights just don't hold up, dude. He leaned on the rules quite a bit, and whatever, that's fine. But that was one of the great crimes, of that era, was that Langford was never given a shot after Jack Johnson became champion because he had.
I mean, and that's bullshit because like he fought Joe Gans for the lightweight title, right? Was it for the title or was it like a non-title fight?
No, it was a non-title fight. I don't even know that they weighed in.
Was it a draw or was it that he beat Gans by decision?
He beat Gans, yeah.
And then
damn, now you got me questioning myself. I'm gonna have to go look. I'm almost positive that it was not for the title, but now I'm gonna have to double check.
I know that he fought Gans, and then like I know he fought Ketchel as well, but that definitely wasn't for the strap.
Yeah, that was a 4-round. That was okay. So he weighed in at 140, Gans at 135. So that it couldn't have been for the title because he wouldn't have made weight. But that was the fight with Ketchel was just a 4-round fight that was like, not an exhibition, but like didn't quite have it. Was just about every report said that it was heating up as it ended, basically in the 4th round.
But it's just like one of those type of things. But like you said, he wasn't bitter about never getting a title shot. And what's more interesting too is that we remember how we discussed last week about Jack Johnson and his relationship with Joe Louis and how they didn't get along, and Louis ended up hating him and resentment and all that other stuff. Guess who ended up getting close with Joe Louis? Sam Langford. And the reason why? Jack Blackburn. See, because Jack Blackburn liked Sam Langford because they obviously had a big series of fights between each other as well. Contemporaries, they both respected the shit out of each other. Jack Blackburn did not consider Langford an asshole that kind of held his contemporaries back. So he felt that Langford could be an asset in terms of like offering Louis advice and stuff like that. And even though Sam was completely blind, but it was, there's like those photos of Langford and Louis together, and there was a lot of notes, and it was depicted in the movie as well, the Joe Louis story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With Coley Wallace,
Coley Wallace,
who looked just like Joe Louis. It was perfect. And when they depicted him in the movie, and they had Sam Langford come meet with Louis, and they had the little playoff where like him and Blackburn like had a little standoff, and they were talking about their fights together and all that stuff. So yeah,
that's a good scene too. That's a good little like exchange.
I love that scene. I can say it word for word because it was awesome back then. Like Sam, you never whipped me. 3 times you tried it. 3 times it was draw. That 3rd time you tried it, and he was like, "Come on, Chappie, I whipped you. You want me?" He was like, don't lie to the boy. Want me to whip you again?" And then Blackburn like, "I say good day to you, Sam."
I think you're the one who actually linked me to it, but there's an interview with an older Sam Langford on YouTube. That's,
Interesting. Okay.
it's only a couple minutes long, but like, they talk to him about some stuff, and like, he looks awful. Like, he looks like he can't see for shit. He's blind, but it's interesting at least because he talks about some of the stuff from his career.
There's that one. There's another one of the only film that's known of our Barbados Joe Walcott, where he's sitting, in his janitorial outfit.
Mhm.
He's at MSG and he's like talking about the past and stuff like that.
That's a good one too. Yeah, it's similar to that. It's really similar to that.
That one's really cool too because you hear him talking. He was like, "Yeah, that Joe Kowinski." He was like, when I fought him back at the LA club, and everyone thought, I was gonna be in trouble because I was so small. I was in trouble. Kowinski was in trouble. I knocked him out good, and he was like, Jim Corbett. After I saw what I did to Kowinski, he didn't want to fight me. Like, it's so cool to hear those old timers talking, those old interviews like that.
Yep. Walcott right there.
Yep.
Yeah, it's actually crazy how scarce photos of him are.
I know. For years I always wanted to own a wire photo of him, that famous one of him holding the mop and everything while he's in his outfit, and I've never seen one for sale.
I don't know. I look semi frequently for photos of him because I want more photos of him, but they're just not out there.
You would think more people would maybe try to reach out to him or something. There's that interview because I think he died soon after that. He got hit by a car, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, shit's crazy. But it's cool to hear him talking. He was like, yeah, he was like, I wish I was still in shape. He was like, I can go back in there with the boys. And I like how he like almost talked about them like they're his bros. You know what I mean? Like the different guys he fought. Go back in there with the boys, make some good money again. You know what I mean? Have myself a couple of Rolls Royces or two.
Yeah, man. I mean, the kind of fraternity or whatever, the boxing circle back then must have been very different. That's for sure.
Totally, totally. But we can fit in a couple of more. I'm gonna go actually a little bit more contemporary for and it's probably gonna be one that again we've talked about him before, and because it's obviously very polarizing. But if you talk about massive punchers, especially the lower weight divisions, you have to mention Naseem Hamed.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
For sure. That's a pretty good one. I mean, especially if you're going lower weight divisions, dude. The guy had
Absolute
very
with this, man. I'm not gonna stay on him for long. We've talked about him before on other shows, but like Hamed, I get it. Like it's easy to hate him because of his attitude, the way he would talk, all this other stuff. His style was really erratic, and it's easy to make fun of his fight with Barrera because he got absolutely clowned in that fight, right? But like, look at his body of work.
I hate that, dude. I hate that that's always
shit
brought
on
up.
him, and and people shit on him because of that. Oh, Hamed sinks, man. He sucks. He's in the realm of this because Barrera did X, Y, and Z.
I know. Like Barrera's some bum or something,
And not only that, but they just act like, because he lost that one fight and the way it ended and everything, that like he was just some sort of mirage that didn't do anything. Dude, Hamed cleaned out the featherweight division practically before then, all right? And like in the junior featherweight division, like he was a beast during his time. He was making the way he would hit guys and just make grown men cry, all right? Look at Billy Hardy's face, who was a tough as nails guy. After he got punched once by Hamed in 30 seconds, it looked like he just got hit with a steel hammer to the face. Manuel Medina. There was tons of guys back then that were like that got beat up, man. Like Hamed had absolute bone breaking power. The only thing, and he had an awkward style too because he came from that, Brendan Ingwell awkward as hell school that was just a pain in the ass to fight any of those guys. Harold Graham style. Yep. So combine that, but then combine one punch knockout power, and you have a nightmare style to fight. Like just a dude who just. You can't touch him. He's coming from different angles. And even if he looks like he's off balance, he can still cook your ass with one punch.
Yeah, he had gone into the Ingle gym as a teenager, I think. And so he'd started fighting and he developed that style since fairly young. And like you said, that Harold Graham, that kind of style, like that he was kind of the predecessor to Naseem Hamed and like the purveyor of that style or whatever. That really herky-jerky, awkward style where the fighter's just kind of like very lengthy and just kind of swaying from one side to the other, but then still able to hit you from those angles that are just impossible. That was a big part of what made Naseem Hamed so effective but obviously he had heavy hands because just throwing punches from weird angles isn't going to give you punching power. He obviously had heavy
Yeah,
hands,
thick calves. You just saw, man. Like he had unnatural power. You know, some guys
super
would
unnatural.
with it, and he was, yeah, like he was a short guy, but he was stocky. Like he wasn't, you know, for featherweight he made 126, but you can see like the thickness to him. You saw it in his legs, you saw it in his arms a little bit. Like he's a strong guy, and just the leverage he was able to get on some of them shots, man. He just clean, smooth out, and
Trying to think who it was, but who was it who he did that like leaping kind of hook, and it's like he jumped when he knocked him out, and the dude's head hit the canvas so hard that the ref is like diving to get him, and Hamed is like still like flying across the ring from the punch he threw by the time the dude like hits the deck. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Sergio Liendo, but it was
but how
right
long did
around
the
that
fight last?
time.
Did it last like a few seconds because that could have been Saeed Lowell.
It
Um,
might have been, but man, it might have been, but I just remember that was just
One
like
of those, I think he still holds the record for quickest featherweight knockout ever, actually. Featherweight title fight knockout.
just brutal, dude.
Flattened him. He flattened, I mean, all those guys during that time. And here's the thing, too, that's pretty fascinating. After he beat Steve Robinson, so that we're going back to like 1995, early 96 time, right? By the time he beats him, this is when he already started not giving a shit in the gym. Like he already started like, you know, slacking and training and doing stuff. So the people that like, you know, by the time he starts fighting Manuel Medina and Tom Johnson and starts being featured on Showtime before he eventually moved on to HBO, they weren't even seeing Hamed at 100%. You know what I mean? Like the Hamed that people were seeing in the early 90s when he was first coming up, before he was featured on anything, was like the whirlwind that people were just like, holy shit, no one's ever seen anything like this. By the time he already started going, he started slacking. He wasn't even training anymore practically. He was already past it to a degree. And by the time he got to HBO and he started fighting Kevin Kelly and the rest of them, he was even past it from what he was doing on Showtime.
Yeah, his team had already started to splinter, you know,
So
and that's he had been with the same team or members of the team for such a long time, and then on top of that, he had an entourage. He had members of his family on his team. I think I want to say it was two brothers.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I remember one of them looked like a twin. Like he had the same hair, he had the same sunglasses. You always saw him
yup.
walking around in the background. He never said a word. He was just there.
Dude, it was like he had an entourage, dude. He had an entire group of people. He had an Adidas sponsorship. He had a
Yeah.
couple other sponsorships. You know, he was big time,
Like
dude.
early on, and before like fighters were getting big ones, it was tough to get an Adidas sponsorship for boxing.
Yeah, dude, and he was big time, especially for a fighter of that weight class. Because I remember back in the day, dude, I remember my brother who was like, he was just a general sports fan. He wasn't like
Yeah.
a, you know, he knew some boxing, but he'd be like, dude, what's up with this Prince guy? You know, what's up with Prince Ahmed? You know, and he was asking because he knew. And I mean, he was big time, dude. He was super fucking big time. But like you said, his team had already started to go. We see that pattern with a lot of fighters where like they make it big or like they start to get more famous and then it just kind of like the priorities shift, dude. Stuff changes. And I guess the famous quote from Hagler, you know, it's tough to get out of bed at 5 a.m. with silk pajamas on. And I mean, he might have meant it literally, but it's a pretty good metaphor for what happens after you become famous as a fighter and
And,
stuff, you know,
and you
losing the
totally
hunger.
saw it, and you totally saw it in his style because you saw him just like he was struggling against certain guys, like guys he should have blasted out. Like Cesar Soto, that was an awkward, ugly fight. Paul Engel, he went rounds with before he finally stopped him. He went the distance with Wayne McCullough, but everybody did, so that doesn't matter. But like, you know, the only time he looked somewhat similar to his older self is when he knocked out poor Vianney Bungu, who just, you know, was completely flummoxed for what Hamed did to him. But like, yeah, man, it was just, you know, Muhammad's power was always able to bail him out. And you know, the prevailing factor today is that everyone's like, "Oh, he ducked Juan Manuel Marquez. He ducked Marquez. He ducked Marquez." Well, let me one thing. All right, was Marquez mandatory challenger for him? Yes, he was mandatory challenger for a long time for Hamed. Was Hamed actively looking to fight him? No, because he was looking to fight more, you know, big fights at that point. Marquez wasn't known. Contrary to popular belief, Marquez wasn't one of the most popular Mexican fighters ever of all time. For
I
many
know people like to retcon that shit. Like, you know, everybody knew Marquette. No, they didn't, dude.
No, they
Don't
didn't.
not
All
at
right.
that. Not back then. Don't lie.
No, the only times he was ever featured was randomly on Fox Sports once in a while. All right. And Hamed was looking for big fish.
Well, he
So,
didn't have an exciting style, dude. You know, he
eh,
wasn't. He's always been a counter puncher.
and then keep this in mind also, by the time Hamed offered him the fight, he offered him, he offered a few other guys, including Marquez. They all turned him down when he finally fought Augie Sanchez. So there you go. But before then, too, when Marquez was finally getting a lot of attention, everyone's like, oh, he's the mandatory challenger to Hamed. Hamed don't want to fight him, blah, blah, blah. He finally gets a fight with Freddie Norwood, another guy who was always avoided on HBO. That was going to be his big opening, his opening party where it was like, now he was going to show his shit because Norwood was looking erratic as hell for a while at that point, and he looked like he was ripe for the taking. You saw that fight. That's one of the worst fights that was ever aired on television. Like,
dude, yeah, just two the bad styles. Just don't mix those styles, dude.
But Marquez legitimately lost that fight. And it's kind of, you watch that one and you look at that and you see Norwood as a southpaw and everything, and then Marquez clearly got better over the years, and he's a great fighter and obviously a legit Hall of Famer, yada yada yada. But like back then, I'm not sure if he was even ready for Hamed.
Well, and that's a possibility too. A lot of people would say like, oh, you scared of him, blah blah blah. Marquez would have knocked him out or something. But dude, there's
Marquez
no guarantee.
wasn't the Marquez that you think of. This wasn't the Marquez that fought Pacquiao.
There's no guarantee here, dude. Like, and that's another thing is that Marquez had taken some punishment by that time, but he'd also gained a lot of experience. So there's no guarantee. But even so, to that Augie Sanchez fight, oh my gosh, dude, that is a really rough knockout, dude. And Augie Sanchez too. I posted a photo of him with Floyd Mayweather from way back in the day, just the other day. Augie Sanchez was a really, really good amateur who defeated Floyd Mayweather, I think maybe more than once. Yes. And I mean,
he had to beat him in the box office, I think to beat him, to make the team.
I don't even know specifically when. I'm not going to lie to you, but I'm pretty positive he beat him, and I think more than once.
Yeah, they did.
Totally. But point is, like, he was a good up and coming fighter. He'd only lost once to that point, but he was, very thought of as very talented, pretty tough, scrappy for sure. But dude, Hamed just absolutely wrecked his shit, and not without some trouble. But just that last like 30-second sequence is some brutal stuff, man.
That's bad to watch, man. It's a vicious knockout. And
like you could see how he'd be favored.
And then when you find out too that like Sanchez got tested and he found out that he was actually prone to being knocked out and concussed, makes it kind of even worse because he got stretchered in that fight.
Yeah, he that was a really cold knockout, dude.
Yeah, that was really bad. But Hamed had to be mentioned, man. He's just one of those guys, polarizing figure, but you can't deny he might be the hardest punching featherweight in history, or if not the hardest one, he's certainly
definitely among them. That's for sure.
Definitely among them.
Well, there, even back in the day, dude, there were those gym stories of him like knocking fools out in the gym. Who knows how true those ever are, but still, like people listen when there's gym stories, and I remember there being gym stories.
You think you recognize him on the street today if you saw him?
Man, I seen some photos.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I asked.
I'm not sure.
Recognize him on the street today if you saw him?
I'm not so sure, but I'd probably like not even think twice and talk some shit, and then he'd knock me out or something,
I mean, I'm not going to pick a fight with him. I'm just like, he's certainly not.
I don't know if I would, but bless him, But sure. That's actually about all I have time for. I apologize for cutting it a little bit short on the show, but I do have to kind of get going. But dude, like I said on the outset, though, we might even do it like a third part because it's like now I'm kind of
thinking to do a third part, man. There's a ton of other guys to still mention.
We keep getting to the end and going like, damn, we didn't talk about this.
I'm not sure if we'll do it exactly very next, but I mean, we'll definitely have to do a third part.
Yeah, no, we'll have to do a third part. We can circle back to it at any point. But dude, I appreciate you also. Not like you did a bunch of work watching knockouts, dude. Come on, that ain't work.
That's what we do.
But no, it's it is some work though. It is some work to kind of like just put a little bit of thought into it, so we're not.
I mean, to talk the stories that we do and to mention the different various things that we bring up and all that. Clearly, some work put into it.
Yeah, we gotta dive into our memory banks here for this a little bit, but no, it's fun. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you putting in the work and having these discussions with me, man. Always appreciate it, for sure. Well, everybody who listened in, we appreciate you. If you listened in on the podcast apps, whichever one it might be, go ahead and subscribe and send us a rating, leave a comment, those kinds of things. Appreciate it. If you watched on YouTube, thank you. Also subscribe, leave a comment, etc. As far as social media goes, the Knuckles and Gloves podcast is on Facebook and Instagram, also on Twitter, though, and also individually. We're on Twitter. Aris is on Twitter as Punch Zone Aris. I'm there as Patrick M. Connor. We'll talk to you there. It's where we are mostly, but Aris, I'll talk to you soon, bro.
Absolutely, everybody. Thanks for listening as always.